Migrants under these programs enter as single applicants. Their families are not given visas to accompany them, so they can't rely on the supports that physically proximate family members provide. Despite the fact that migrants in the SOP have accumulated decades of work in Canada, sometimes spending more months in this country than they spend in their communities of origin, there's no pathway of earned residence linked to either program. Another feature of these programs is forced rotation. So in order to participate in subsequent years, they must return to their countries at the end of their contracts. And in some countries, report to the Ministry of Labour a week after their contracts end. For pilot migrants, once they've accumulated 4 years of work in Canada, they're ineligible to come back to work in Canada for a subsequent 4. The programs also contain a number of additional coercive mechanisms. So for example, rather than, when employers go to hire workers, rather than, say I need 20 workers and have 20 workers sent to them, the program, based on the qualifications for the position in question, the programs enable employers to choose workers on the basis of source country and gender. And the forms they actually fill out for the SOP has a little box where they put, what nationality, what country they want to send them with workers. And so an employer might choose to hire 100 English-speaking Jamaicans to work on the fruit orchard and 25 Spanish-speaking women to work in the packing house. And some employers even go further, asking recruiters to request workers of a particular height or a particular weight. So the fact that formal and informal discrimination is built into the very architecture of Canada's temporary employment programs enables employers to foster competition between workers. And one way that this is done is that migrants are routinely threatened that they're going to be replaced with migrants from another country. This migrant advocate, who also worked in a greenhouse at one time, said, "In the greenhouse where I worked, the employer boosted his productivity by using constant fear. He told the workers, 'The Mexicans are coming, the Mexicans are arriving soon.'" These are the Canadian workers, actually. "If you don't work fast, you'll be replaced by a Mexican." This is intentional. So all the workers were imagining that the Mexican men were all young, strong, and very quick. Then the Mexicans came, short, fat, some between 40 and 50 years old. The Punjabi women said, "But weren't they supposed to be all young and tall?" The fact that employers can choose workers by nationality and gender and sometimes other bases of social difference also creates competition between migrant sending countries to deliver these ideal workers that employers are seeking. And this ad that featured in a farming magazine was paid for by the Honduran government. And I don't know if you can see that up there, but the ad promotes their nationals as motivated to do what is needed, focused on quality, and with experience in hard work. And at the very corner there, there's also a 1-800 number that can be used to report workers who are not meeting expectations 24/7, 365 days of the week. And the ad promises that in the case of contract default by the worker, a replacement worker will be flown in at the cost of the Honduran people from the 2011 budget. The ways in which these programs restrict migrant rights and the exercise of rights enable particular labor regimes that are not possible with a citizen labor force. For example, they involve long antisocial shifts that are accepted by migrants who are far from their families, who are eager to earn Canadian wages, but who are also unable to refuse unreasonable work schedules. one survey that I carried out, part of a larger project with Gerardo and Otero in British Columbia in 2007 and 2008, found that Mexican workers were working 12, on average in periods of peak production, were working 12 hours a day, Monday to Friday, on average 8 hours on both Saturday and Sunday, and then getting up on Monday to do that 12-hour shift again. So an average of 76 hours a week. And as David, one Mexican migrant, put it, my employer has only been requesting Mexican workers for 3 years. He used to work with Hindus, how some of the Mexican migrants refer to Canadians, Punjabi-speaking Canadians. He used to work with Hindus. Now that he sees that Mexicans can work, he says that Hindus are useless. It's because at 3 or 4 o'clock, they get up and leave. He doesn't demand more hours, but with us, he demands we work 12 hours. Temporary migration programs also provide employers with a captive labor force that will accept variable employment. So one of the big, I'm talking about these long schedules, but one of the biggest problems with the pilot has been underemployment, whereby employers hire too many workers and who are then underemployed. And this is difficult for migrants psychologically. They're separated from their family, they're sitting in their bunkhouse, bored, and stressed because they're not able to send remittances home. And my research has heard a number of cases of migrants who were even going without food, practically starving themselves so that they could have money to send home to their families. Some employers require workers to be available 24/7. So migrants are literally chained to the work site. They can't go to the grocery store, they can't go out to the bar, they can't come over to my house for dinner because they need to be in the house waiting for that call, the call from the employer that may come at any time. And just a couple of quotes on variable employment. Juan, a Guatemalan migrant, said, "The worst is that there is no work. They bring in many migrants and there is no work. There are days that they give me many hours, up to 14, and days that they leave me resting at home. They exploit me one day and the other." And then another woman says, "We did not receive our first check for more than a month after we arrived because of underemployment." It was a terrible experience for me. We went hungry, and so did our families. And in fact, it was connecting with Canadians outside the farm that actually connected these workers to a food bank. The work is very variable according to a commodity. So there's a lot of difference in the type of a wide range of work that migrant workers are doing. But it's generally physically strenuous. And it can take place under a range of climatic conditions. So, hot greenhouses, chilled kill floors, or even, outdoors in rain-soaked British Columbia. And agricultural work is among the most dangerous occupations in Canada, but it's also the least protected. So while all farm workers are more vulnerable than most workers in other occupations, migrants face specific concerns. Fear of losing their, maybe even losing hours or losing their jobs means that migrants work when they're ill and injured and fail to disclose health concerns to their employers. And there are a number of reports out that have been done both in Ontario and Quebec that have surveyed migrant workers, and so I can have that available for people who are interested. But in general, migrants fear that any sign of illness or injury will result either in their deportation or the failure for the employer to recall them the following year. As one woman said, another co-worker had a pain in his stomach at midday and asked to return to the house because his stomach hurt. The boss didn't request him again the following year because he said that the co-worker resembled the Canadians with days that they wanted to work and days that they didn't. So he was of no use to them. So more often than not, migrants' economic need for their Canadian wages, together with the coercive mechanisms that are built into these programs, really result in their acquiescence to the working or living conditions that they are presented with. And in most of the research done on these programs, acquiescence is a major theme. There is considerable evidence in Canada and internationally that the use of migrant workers has allowed growers in high-income countries to achieve the flexibility that is more and more demanded by the globalized neoliberal food system. And this flexibility is achieved through a variety of employment practices, including some of those that I've mentioned today, such as being able to retain a workforce despite a variable schedule, and new mechanisms of control that have intensified the workplace and extracted greater productivity. There's also some evidence that the use of migrant workers have depressed wage levels in agriculture. And I have a quote by a human resource manager in BC that said, prior to the seasonal agricultural workers program, well, I was paying $15, $16 an hour to Canadians, and these guys, the Mexicans, get 8 to 9, and they're worth double that. But that's the Canadian minimum wage, which is stipulated in the program, so we go on that. There's also evidence that the incorporation of migrants has transformed the wage structure of occupations entirely. For example, jobs like mushroom picking that formerly paid piece rates to citizen workers, those are now paying hourly rates to migrant workers, but still achieving the same yields. So migrant workers are still being held to the same productivity targets, and maybe even surpassing them, that citizen workers achieved, being incentivized by higher salaries. But they're getting those meeting those productivity targets through these mechanisms of labor control that I've discussed. And I think there's a whole thesis in just looking at the technologies also involved in labor control. So, given the labor regimes that I have described, it's unsurprising that migrant workers do not figure in the local food narrative dispensed by industry and government in their marketing efforts. But more surprising is the fact that labor issues are only weakly addressed, if at all, in discussions of a sustainable food system. When Michael Pollan and Sarah Elton spoke to a packed house here in Guelph some weeks ago as part of the Eden Mills Festival, neither of the speakers, the moderator, or those lucky few people who gave comments or questions had anything to say about the labor conditions of farm and food industry workers locally or globally. In general, workers, labor rights, immigration issues are missing from the alternative food movement. As Patricia Allen, writing about California, has argued, workers as actors and justice as principle are missing in both theory and practice of alternative agri-food consumer efforts. Kirsten Cole, in her analysis of sustainable food and agricultural initiatives in the GTA, argues that, quote, when it comes to education and advocacy, few sustainable food initiatives shed light on the fact that migrant workers even exist. And she does cite a couple of exceptions.